Interesting start
Happy
to the
New
year, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. We've got some interesting events unfolding in the Middle East, but at the same time we have to remember that the US and China are about to embark on this so-called Phase 1 agreement, which President Trump has now tweeted about signing on the 15th of January. So we're expecting a Chinese delegation to come to Washington, even if the final text of that agreement hasn't quite been released in both languages yet. But broadly speaking, I think it's positive in the sense that unlike most of what's taken place between the US and China since 2018, the two sides broadly agree on what they've agreed, which hasn't always been the case. And this is much more of a purchasing agreement rather than a free trade agreement. That is to say, it really revolves around China committing to buying another $200 billion worth of imports from the US, which will make Donald Trump very happy. There have been commitments from China as well to seek to redress some of these US grievances about forced technology transfer and the respect for intellectual property. But these are commitments which China has always made, so the implementation...
And they're vague.
Exactly, they're vague. So we will have to see how this works in practice. It's one thing to come up with these principled commitments on paper, but their execution in practice is often very different, and the devil lies in the details. But it's clear that Donald Trump is very keen to sign off on this as a major political victory ahead of a pretty brutal election campaign in the US. China has been a bit more muted about celebrating this as a major milestone, but it will also be relieved that at least the gaze of Donald Trump and the White House has shifted away from the trade disputes on China and moved towards the Middle East.
Yeah. Does that surprise you, though, that we've started out the year with this aggressive move, this hawkish move from the US, and not just the assassinate, or the killing, I should say, but the subsequent heightened rhetoric from President Trump saying that there'll be retaliation if Iran does anything, talking about what they would potentially do to Iraq and wanting reimbursement if US troops are removed. Has that kind of pivot surprised you, particularly as a lot of analysts are saying it really leaves their Middle East efforts and strategy in tatters?
Well, this is right. I mean, this is tactics in search of a strategy, really. No one is quite clear on the direction that this is headed in. It's not clear that either side is being particularly rational here. So there is an element of unpredictability. What it does mean, though, is that the US, despite wanting to commit itself towards Asia, towards great power competition with China, seems to continue to be embroiled in the Middle East, and that will continue to be the center of attention in Washington for a while to come, which is also why I think Russia and China must be privately relieved that this Iran debacle has offset some pressure on them as well.
Herve, Kathleen Hayes in New York, just a quick follow-up on that. Will China use this time of uncertainty, clouds over Donald Trump, although we just had Ian Bremmer from Eurasia Group, I think, saying people are automatically dismissing what Trump has done, and there is actually some positive aspect to it. But will China use this against the U.S.?
Well, China wants to paint itself as a good international citizen, and therefore will try to juxtapose what's emerged out of the White House in recent days vis-à-vis Iran as an example of what not to do, and how much more responsible China is in terms of being rule-abiding. So this plays into that narrative very well. I think that China and Russia both see themselves as protectors of adversaries of the U.S. Wherever they are, whether that's Venezuela or Iran, and they're playing that role.